force field. Don't worry. I'll break you out of there. Glad I could help.
This is the build-up. They want to remove me, to silence me, to discredit me. They have tried to stop me in every possible way, from taking my finances to imprison me, to slander me, to linking me to Darren Osborne and extremism. Now they want to take away the final thing I have. If they can do it to me, they can do it to you.
I have some concerns about the judicial handling of the Tommy Robinson case on the part of Judge Jeffrey Marson, QC. I was reading an article about apparently Samantha Markle, who is Meghan Markle's half-sister, Meghan Markle being the new wife of Prince Harry, brother of Prince William, who is second in line for the throne. Apparently she was tweeting support for Tommy Robinson, which I found surprising. I didn't expect to see that kind of thing from a source so close to the royals. But anyway, I came across the judge's comments, which I haven't actually seen in this kind of detail before, and they worry me slightly. If you have a look at them here, it says, Judge Jeffrey Marson QC blasted Robinson for his highly prejudicial actions, referring to separate court proceedings, that Robinson was in danger of derailing, those are the Muslim group rape gangs. Judge Marson QC said no one could possibly conclude that it would be anything other than highly prejudicial to the defendants in that trial. So the first thing we ought to do is establish what prejudicial means. I think we all basically understand it means detrimental to the interests of. I found this legal definition of prejudice. This is from in American law, but I don't think there's any material difference in the definitions. So 2. A judge might exclude a piece of evidence as prejudicial if it would unfairly bias the jury against a party. So the test here would be, does whatever happened bias the party in the sense that it moves them from point A to point B, from not guilty to guilty? Does it have that prejudicial effect? That's the only thing that is of interest in a trial. Does it have an effect on the potential guilty verdict? So let's think about what actually happened, which we saw on the 75-minute live stream. What we saw was Tommy Robinson walking around, basically talking to himself, talking into his cell phone. He also read out the names of the defendants which had already been published, and he had some contact with the defendants. He said a few things to them. He said, oh, that's you see you've got your prison bag with you. A little bit cheeky. It presumed that the defendants thought they were going to prison, which they, I'm guessing, were. He also said, what do you think about the verdicts? The defendants spoke to him, and they fairly nasty sexual innuendo and insults back at Tommy Robinson, as I suppose you might expect. These were the potentially prejudicial things. Well, these were the things that happened which would be judged as potentially prejudicial. Now, the names were already on record. No prejudice there. The just walking around talking to himself isn't going to prejudice anybody, isn't going to push anyone from point A to point B, from not guilty to guilty. The statement, I see you've got your prison bag with you, what do you think about the verdicts? Is that going to have a meaningful effect? I don't think it is. I don't think by any rational measure you could think that saying those things to the defendants, that these things would have any effect, would cause a defendant who was in the trial, had been in the trial, had heard all the evidence, the damning evidence in this case, would then be swayed from a not guilty stance to a guilty stance. I can't see that. What about where the defendants turned round and spat various charming insults at Tommy Robinson? I suppose if you wanted to make a case for prejudice, the defence lawyers could say, well, they were put in a position of being allowed to incriminate themselves, a position they shouldn't have been put into. But those insults, and you can look at the live feed, it's online, it's on my channel, 75 minutes. If you look at those insults, are they going to meaningfully prejudice? Are they going to push a juror who goes home at night, as they could have done on the Friday night, seen the live feed, seen the defendants saying, go do this and that to your mother, as they said, and thought to themselves, well, I was leaning towards not guilty, but now I'm leaning towards guilty. If Tommy had actually come out and shouted something, waved a piece of paper saying, I've got evidence here that Muhammad al-Islam bin Baghdadi has done something to my niece's sister's cousins and it all happened, etc., etc., I can see how that would be prejudicial evidence. It would be effectively creating a trial outside the actual trial. That would be prejudicial. But have the defendants insult you, or say something about what they think about the verdict, or the fact that they happen to be carrying a prison bag, by any rational measure, that can be considered prejudicial, can be considered to pass the test of it pushes the juror from there to there, from not guilty to guilty. I don't see that test being passed. I don't see that test being passed in any circumstance. However, the judge doesn't only not agree with me, and the judge is obviously a highly intelligent person, but I'm not an idiot myself. And he knows law, and I don't know law, but I think I've established what the definition of prejudice is, which is the only aspect of law we need to worry about here. So we're kind of on a level playing field in this fairly limited sense. The judge not only doesn't agree with me, he thinks the complete opposite. If I was to rephrase his statement in a way to concur with what I think, I would say something like, I would probably lighten it a little bit, but I would say it's highly unlikely that anybody would conclude that the actions would be anything other than entirely unprejudicial to the defendants in the trial. But what Judge Marson said himself was no one could possibly conclude that it would be anything other than highly prejudicial to the defendants in the trial. So these actions of saying, what do you think about the verdict? See, you got your prison bag, and then giving them the opportunity to spit back various charming insults. It's impossible to consider that these things would be anything other than highly likely to cause the jurors to go from who were swaying around a not guilty-esque verdict into guilty. That seems to be existing in an alternative universe. That seems to be entirely detached from reality. I think I've made a reasonable case for how these are non-prejudicial based on the definition of prejudice. The judge seems to think the exact opposite. This is very strange. This leads me to potentially conclude that the judge isn't being entirely fair in all this. So let me pursue that line in another couple of directions. We know 4 minutes before the police came in to arrest Tommy, the judge was looking down from his window. We know the judge was on the scene. We know it was the judge, evidently, who sent the police in with a charge of breach of the peace. Now, this is a very simple charge. It's not like embezzlement or fraud or serial murder. Breach of the peace basically means a situation where people or property can be damaged. And maybe you could make that argument that in a kind of verbal altercation between Tommy and the defendants, there is the possibility of such a breach. And it's not complicated, and the judge was looking down from his window at what was going on. He could see the scene. And he sent the police in for a charge of breach of the peace. Where did that charge go? It changed into the charge of breach of licence conditions. Now that charge was entirely legitimate because Tommy did breach his licence conditions. But where did the breach... excuse me. Where did the breach of peace go? You can have two charges concurrently. You can have as many charges as you need to have. There's no limit on the number of charges a defendant can be accused with. And you'd think, well, throw the book at him, throw everything. Breach of licence conditions, breach of the peace, breach of whatever. But the breach of the peace charge was removed to be replaced only with the breach of licence conditions, which was fair enough again because he was breaching his licence conditions. But where did the breach of peace charge go? Why did it vanish? If the judge thought that it was legitimate, why did he drop it? It doesn't seem to make any sense, unless you consider that a breach of the peace charge would have necessitated a whole different ballgame. The breach of licence was forward. Licence breached, this is the punishment, go back to serve your sentence. All done and dusted in half an hour. Put him in the police car, off to the gulag. Now if it was breach of peace, that's put him out on bail, get in new lawyers, get his lawyer in, get the prosecution, get new dates, get a new case. It would all have been postponed. It could not conceivably have happened that day. And it might not be too conspiratorial to think that the reason they left the breach of the peace charge was because they wanted Tommy spirited away that day. It wasn't the concern. The concern wasn't what he was doing. It was getting him out the way. That's the way it looks for me. It's up to you to decide if there is a reasonable case to say that. In the same direction, the gagging order which the judge applied to Tommy says, His Honour Judge Marson QC made the following order. Since it appears to be necessary for avoiding a substantial risk of prejudice to the administration of justice in these proceedings, the publication of any report of these proceedings shall be postponed until after the conclusion of the trial of T2017 and T2018, etc. Those are the Muslim gang rape trials which Tommy was reporting on. So this order doesn't gag reporting on Tommy's brief, tiny trial because it was over. You can't prejudice a trial which is ended. I don't think that needs explaining any further. The prejudice he's claiming to be referring to is to the other trials, the Muslim gang rape trials, which Tommy was reporting on. Those trials are already subject to a gagging order. Now I know that because in the first place we know they're going to be subject to a gagging order anyway. These kind of things, that's the way they go. Certainly in these Muslim gang rape trials, they like to keep things very quiet. But anyway, irrespective of that, I happen to know that there is a gagging order on these trials, or there was while they were current, because I phoned up Leeds Crown Court on last Friday, and they told me there was a gagging order on the trials. And assuming it's still in place, and I think it probably is, then you can also ring them up. Just Google Leeds Crown Court contact, get the number, and you can phone them up, and they'll probably tell you that there is a gagging order on those trials still in place. So, if this press gagging order hadn't been in place, what could the press have said? They couldn't have talked about the Muslim gang rape trials because they were gagged. All they could have said was something along the lines of, founder of the EDL, Stephen Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, was found in breach of licence conditions today at Leeds Crown Court and sentenced with 13 months in Hull Prison. We can't comment on the trials he was reporting because of press restrictions. There is no way those Muslim gang rape trials could have been prejudiced. There is no way whatsoever that there could have been any prejudice because the press couldn't have talked about them. This gagging order served no legitimate purpose. So why was it there? The judge didn't want the press to talk about it. The judge didn't execute the breach of peace charge because it would have necessitated a lengthy trial and everything would have been out. People would have known that Tommy was being tried again. He put the gagging order on not to not prejudice these other trials because they were already not being prejudiced by their own gagging orders. He put this gagging order on reporting of Tommy's trial because they wanted to get Tommy in the prison car out to Leeds prison as quickly and quietly as possible. This looks suspect to me. I don't know how it looks to you after I've explained things the way I see them, but I think this is nothing to do with legitimate concerns about actually realistically prejudicing another trial and everything about getting an inconvenient dissident rushed away under the cloak of darkness to the Gulag, to Hull prison. That's the way it looks to me, anyway. I don't think this looks like a legitimate case of justice in action. Admittedly, I'm biased, so I'm looking for what best serves Tommy Robinson's purposes, but I hope I've presented my thoughts in a factual, in a coherent way, and you can judge them for yourself. Anyway, to me it looks like a stitch-up, is the bottom line. It looks like something illegitimate here has happened, other than what we are told happened. It looks like they were trying to spirit Tommy away as quickly and quietly as possible and have nobody know anything about it. Anyway, it's up to you to judge. Thank you for watching.